These are the 10 guns sold earlier this month for 100 times compared to what the original buyer paid for it. Some of these literally started as $40 revolvers. Let's get into it. The Smith & Wesson Model 29 was already famous before Sinatra touched it. Clint Eastwood made it a household name in Dirty Harry. Most collectors assume celebrity guns are overpriced gimmicks, inflated by a name and nothing else. But factory documentation changes the math completely. This wasn't a prop gun. It was Sinatra's, engraved with presentation provenance, tracing straight back to him through documented paperwork, not rumor. Here's what most people don't know. A standard Model 29 in the 70s left the factory for around $200. Sinatra's example crossed the auction block for $82,250. That's not a fluke. That's what happens when real ownership history collides with an already iconic platform that was already climbing in value on its own. But Sinatra's gun isn't even the best name-attached story on this list, because the next entry didn't need a famous owner. It needed a factory that almost gave up on it entirely. In 1921, nobody wanted a Thompson submachine gun. $200 was a fortune. Most law enforcement budgets balked. Civilian sales were worse. Colt built them. The market shrugged. Production numbers stayed low because demand never showed up. But scarcity has a way of rewriting history decades later. This specific Thompson isn't just any 1921. It's documented as the last one to ever leave Colt's factory floor. Per the Institute of Military Technology, it's the only known example to pass through a single owner besides Colt itself, never offered publicly until this sale. That's the kind of provenance collectors chase for years and never find, even with deep pockets and patience. $200 in 1921, $117,500 at auction. Not adjusted for inflation, just nominal dollars, sitting almost 600 times higher than the original price tag on the factory invoice. But here's the twist most people miss. Price isn't only built on rarity or history. Sometimes it's built on whose hands touched the engraving tool. Wilbur Glahn never fired a shot that mattered. He just cut steel, one line at a time, under magnification, for weeks at a stretch. But that's the entire point of this entry. Most people think a Colt single-action army is valuable because of the model. It isn't, not by itself. A standard single-action army off the rack is a commodity. Collectors know this. The market knows this. Thousands exist in unremarkable condition. What changes everything is the hand behind the engraving. Glahn is one of the few master engravers whose name alone moves an auction room. No MIM parts. No machine rolled scroll work. Every scene, every leaf, every border cut entirely by hand. This particular single-action army crossed the block at $117,500. But here's what most buyers don't realize. The gun itself is almost irrelevant to that number. The engraving is the asset. The steel is just the canvas it was applied to. That distinction is the difference between a collector and an investor. But the next entry doesn't rely on craftsmanship at all. It relies on a contract price the United States government signed in 1847. $28. That's what Samuel Colt got per unit when the Army ordered the Walker. Not per gun and accessories. Per gun. Full stop. The Walker Dragoon was the most powerful black powder revolver in the world at the time, a 5-pound hand cannon capable of dropping a horse, and the government still haggled it down to $28 a copy. This specific example, marked a company number 14, carries documented martial contract provenance, not a reproduction, not a later commercial Colt built for civilian sale. An original 1847 military contract Walker, traceable through the original unit issue. It sold for $141,000. Run the math. That's roughly 5,000 times the original contract price, not adjusted for inflation. Just raw dollars, then versus now, on a gun the government once treated as disposable field equipment. But most people assume military contract guns are the ceiling for scarcity-driven value. They're not. Sometimes the name on the case matters more than the contract on the gun. A case Desert Eagle doesn't normally break records. Until it's tied to a 4-star general who ran Desert Storm. This presentation piece, gifted to General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, sold for $152,750, a world record for the model and not a close one. Most collectors chase rarity of manufacture. Fewer chase rarity of ownership. But ownership is where the real ceiling sits, because manufacture can be repeated and ownership can't. A Desert Eagle off a shelf is a conversation piece. A Desert Eagle gifted to the general who commanded the largest tank battle since World War II is a museum artifact wearing a price tag, sitting in a category of 1. That's the difference provenance makes. Not the metal, not the caliber, the hand it passed through, and what that hand was doing at the time. If you're still watching, you're already ahead of most people who clicked this video. Most viewers bail by now. You didn't. That tells me something about you. So, let's keep going, because the next gun is where the math starts getting ridiculous. A Sharps new model 1869 left the factory for somewhere around $35 to $45. Not a fortune, even by 1869 standards, but not pocket change either. But Sharps rifles built a reputation for long-range accuracy that outlived every cheaper competitor on the market at the time. Buffalo hunters trusted them. Military snipers trusted them. That reputation never faded, even after the company itself eventually folded. This benchmark example sailed past its high estimate, closing at $199,750. Do the division. That's close to 5,000 times the original price. A rifle that cost less than a month's wages in 1869 now sells for the price of a house in most of the country. But scarcity isn't only about age. Sometimes it's about politics and a single signature on a single piece of legislation. A Chinese Type 56, built on the AK-47 pattern, sold for a world record $246,750. Most people hear AK pattern and picture a cheap surplus crate gun selling for a few $100s. That assumption used to be correct. Then the import restrictions hit, and the entire supply chain collapsed overnight. Executive bans on certain foreign military rifles throughout the late 1980s choked off new supply almost instantly. What used to flood into the country at low cost simply stopped arriving permanently, with no exceptions carved out later. Existing examples didn't multiply. They couldn't. The door closed, and it stayed closed. That's the scarcity engine driving this number. Not craftsmanship, not provenance. A legislative line drawn decades ago that turned an ordinary surplus rifle into a 6-figure outlier almost nobody saw coming at the time, but legislated scarcity is recent history. The next two entries go back to the lever-action era, where the scarcity was built directly into the factory's own paperwork, decades before any law touched it. In 1876, Winchester offered something unusual: pay extra, and the factory would hand-select your rifle for exceptional accuracy, then mark it 1 of 1,000, a designation earned, not bought outright. The surcharge ran around $100 on top of a $50 standard rifle. Call it $150 total in 1876 money for a rifle the factory itself vouched for. But then the program quietly died. Demand never matched the marketing. Most working cowboys and ranchers didn't care about a hand-selected barrel. Winchester eventually scrapped the designation altogether, which means every surviving 1 of 1,000 rifle is frozen at a fixed, finite count that will never grow again. This example realized $793,125. That's roughly 5,000 times the original premium price, not the value of a used rifle. The factory premium alone multiplied 5,000 times over, on top of whatever the base rifle was already worth. Most collectors know the 1 of 1,000 story. Fewer know it almost didn't survive as a category at all. Winchester reportedly considered destroying unsold examples rather than selling them at a loss during the program's final years. If they had, this entire price point wouldn't exist today. There'd be nothing left to chase. But even that story gets dwarfed by what happened in 2016 when a single Winchester rifle redefined the entire market for almost 10 years straight. A high-condition Winchester Model 1886 sold for $1,265,000. For almost a decade, that sale stood as the high water mark for any rifle at public auction. Every collector, every auction house, every appraiser used that number as the ceiling, the figure nobody expected to see broken in their lifetime. The original retail price for an 1886 rifle in that era sat somewhere around $25 to $30, depending on configuration. Run that math slowly. A rifle that cost less than a week's wages in the 1880s held $1 million record for the better part of 10 years, untouched by inflation arguments or market corrections. But records exist to be broken. And in May of 2026, something finally did it. A cased Colt No. 5 Texas Patterson percussion revolver sold for $1.41 million. That single sale didn't just beat the old Winchester record. It dethroned a number that had stood since 2016, untouched, unchallenged, treated like a ceiling nobody would ever hit again in this market. The Patterson is now the 13th most expensive firearm ever sold at public auction. The 6th most expensive handgun, period. Full stop, no asterisks. Samuel Colt's original Patterson revolvers issued for somewhere around $40 when new. $40 in an era when that bought serious labor, serious goods, serious time on someone's farm or in someone's shop. $40 then. $1.41 million now. That's not 100 times. That's not even 1,000 times. That's a multiplier stretching into the tens of thousands on a single handgun at a single auction in a single weekend, with a room full of bidders watching it happen in real time. Most people will never own a piece like this. But the ones who understood the Colt name before this sale, who already knew Patterson revolvers were the foundation of the entire collectible firearms market, those are the ones who saw this coming long before the gavel dropped. That's not luck. That's knowing the history before the market catches up to it. 10 guns, 10 stories, one pattern running through every single one of them. The gap between original cost and final price is never random.